working session of this study day. The proposal we received after issuing our call for paper in September really amazed me and the rest of the organizing committee for their quality and diversity. And thus, we are really eager to listen to your papers and to learn about your researches. Thus, it's not my intention to take too much time for this introductory address. Still, before meeting our speakers and immersing ourselves in their presentation, I feel the need to say just a few things on where we are and what we are doing today. The institution that is hosting us, to whom goes my heartfelt gratitude, is the Fondazione Ernesta Besso, a cultural foundation that has been active in Rome for more than a century in promoting and valorizing humanistic research. The Fondazione has been created in 1918 by Marco Besso, the man you see there, a businessman, philanthropist, and the former owner of this building. In 1914, Marco was left a widower after the untimely death of his wife, Ernesta Pesaro Mauragonato. You can see her there. To honor her memory, he included in his last will a codicil with which he established a foundation that would bear the name of his late wife and would act, in Besso's own words, to the exclusive advantage of the feminine sex. After Marco's death, his will would be translated into practice by his only surviving daughter, Natalia Besso Lumbroso, known as Lia. There, the lady there, with the flowers. On the 17th of June 1922, Lia signed the Certificate of Incorporation of the new foundation, which received the official name of Fondazione Ernesta Besso di Venezia. In the very same days, Lia drafted the status of the new institution, according to which the foundation would act exclusively for the moral and social progress of women of the working class and of the middle classes. These aims had to be pursued, according to the status, by promoting conferences and seminars to improve the cultural and professional training of women workers, by sponsoring scholarship grants for them, by giving them free access to a library with a wide range of educational books. The first conference organized by the new institution was held in this room on January the 10th, 1923. For this reason, last year, the Fondazione celebrated with great ceremony its 100th anniversary. In this century of experience, the Fondazione has been active not only in making education, professional training, and culture accessible to working-class women and to other disadvantaged categories like disabled youth, but also in promoting studies and research on these categories, reflecting upon their condition in society through history. For this reason, the Fondazione, its president Caterina De Mata, and its scientific director, Professor Marina Cafiero, who will come here in the afternoon, were quite happy to host the conference to which we are about to participate, which aims to explore the position of marginal categories in medieval society through the prism of canon law. Just a few more words on this initiative. This study day has been organized in partnership with the international publishing house Trident Medieval on the occasion of the launch of a new series of books headed Canon Law, New Perspectives on the Law of the Church in Medieval Society, that I will be editing together with Professor Andrea Herrera of the University of Parma. In this series, we aim to publish researches which discuss medieval canon law, first of all, as a social and cultural phenomenon, not excessively delving into the technicalities which are dear to legal historians, but using the canon law norms and the reasonings of canon law scholars as a way to understand the European civilization of the Middle Ages, and to enlighten the personal and collective experience of men and women that live in that context. To this aim, our intention is to open our series to the contribution of specialists of any field of medieval studies, from archaeologists to historians of philosophy, from literature scholars to theologians, economists, and many others. We hope and believe that the researches in each of these disciplines will be of the greatest help for jurists, as I myself am, to reach a better understanding of their own object of study, just as our patient rumination of the often not easily readable juridical sources will not be useless in the context of a wider effort to understand the medieval world in its endless beautiful complexity. This openness of perspective in our wishes will not be pursued only on a disciplinary and methodological level, but also from a geographical point of view, accepting contribution from each part of the Catholic world and beyond. The comparative approach to other forms of medieval ecclesiastical legislation or to the religious law established within other faiths will always be welcome in our pages. The pluralism we had in mind seems to be well represented in the remarkable group of speakers that will give a paper here today. Our call for paper was met with the interest of scholars working in the most various fields of medieval studies, from academic institutions of 9 different countries. We are thus ready to a wide-ranging interdisciplinary confrontation. For their effort to guarantee the quality and the richness of the debate, my special thanks go to those who are not mother tongue English speakers and nevertheless accepted to speak in English. Thank you. This said, I think we can start calling out here the speakers of our first panel, which concern the more extreme forms of marginality within the medieval church, schismatics and heretics. With great regret, I have to inform you that Aviad Markovitz from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who had to speak of the group that represented the others par excellence for the medieval church, that is the Jews, is not here for grave reasons pertaining to his direct involvement in the war in Gaza. The first panel will thus be the shortest of the 4 that we will have today, including only 2 speakers. The first speaker is Emanuele Ciarrocchi. I invito la regia. Emanuele is a PhD candidate at the Maximilians-Universität in Munich. He studied at the University of Florence, where he graduated cum laude in Dantean philology and in medieval cultural history. He is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University, and in the fall semester of 2024, he will be a visiting student researcher at the Department of Italian Studies at Berkeley. So I welcome Emanuele, who is connected from New York. Buongiorno, Emanuele. You can start. Non c'è l'audio.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. So thank you and hello to everyone from New York, and thanks to the organizer for accepting my proposal. I would like to say straight away that, as Federica mentioned, my main field of research are the Dante studies. And therefore, I will be very happy to hear from you any suggestions and criticism on the way I intersect Dante's text with canon law. So let me share my... Okay. So, as it is perhaps well known, Dante's Inferno is structured in concentric circles in a descending path that culminates in the smallest inner circle, the one with the smallest radius where Satan is stuck. There is no doubt that the greater the proximity to the center, the greater the gravity of the sin being punished. In fact, the topographical construction that Dante uses during all the descent strongly emphasizes this concept. Things are commonly divided in 3 main areas: incontinence, violence, and fraud, with the latter section further subdivided within itself. Its transition from one section to another is well allied and often made impossible for the 2 pilgrims who must rely on the intervention of an external agent. A specific discussion would deserve the circle dedicated to heresy, which does not appear to fit into this division, but I cannot go into it here. What I am interested in highlighting is the distance that separates the heretics, Inferno 10, from the schismatic, Inferno 28. While the 6th circle is dedicated to the former, which appear both physically and logically well separated from all the others, the sour of discord, as Dante called the schismatics, are to be found in the 9th and penultimate subdivision of the realm of Malebolge, which is the 8th circle. The 6th and 8th circle may seem close together, but they are not. In Inferno 11, while they are still on the heretic circle, the 2 pilgrims need to stop to get used to the stench coming from below the high bank where they are staying. And this is a real rarity in the Divine Comedy, since sometimes the actor doesn't even make them stop to talk with the damneds they meet. Again, in Inferno 17, they need the help of Gerione, an infernal creature able to fly, to reach the next circle. Beyond this emphasized physical division, the two cantos are also narratively well spaced, being separated by 17 cantos, half of the 34 that make up the Inferno. An initial examination of medieval vision has shown how heresy and schism are often found together and placed at the bottom of hell. This is the case, for example, of one of the most important visions in medieval time, the Visio Pauli, where they are located at the lowest point of hell, sealed with 7 seals, in a place that may have greater affinity with Dante's Heretics, but, in terms of position within the structure, is more similar to that of Schismatics in the Commedia. However, the study of the concept of heresy in Dante's work has suffered from a certain lack of interest, and still, in 2013 and 2018, were reported the scarcity of literature on the subject. Anyway, I will argue that the problem lies not so much in the volume of secondary literature, but in the historical understanding of the concept of heresy. Indeed, analysis have often assumed an anachronistic concept of heresy. For example, Giorgio Padoan, just to cite one of the most interesting articles on Inferno 10, spoke of heretics in a proper sense of the word and heresy in a traditional sense of the word. This assumption of meaning, however, turns out to be totally inadequate to describe the heretical phenomenon in the late medieval centuries, and is therefore misleading in the analysis of Dante's narrative. Given the nature of this conference, I will not carry out an historical reconstruction of the historical concept of heresy, and I will limit myself to provide some coordinates. We know that starting from the ecclesial reform of the 11th century, the concept of heresy began to have a strictly political connotation. In the Dictatus Papae, at the key turning point for the construction of the Petrine figures as monarch of the Catholicism, it is stated that it is not possible to be considered Catholic while not agreeing with Rome, a concept that became even clearer when the Pope wrote to Abbo Guglielmo Firsau, Hereticum esse constat qui Romane Ecclesia non concordat. From now on, any alternative path would be rejected because it divides from the Rectus, namely the interpretation given by the Pope, who is now a Rex and is the only one who can promulgate new laws. Any dissent with Rome, whatever theological or political, would from now on result in the loss of one Catholic identity, falling into heresy. Thus, a new heresy was born, the heresy of disobedience. That is, of those who sinned not against veritas, but against authoritas. It is the moment of ecclesiologization, the shift from persuasio to coercitio. In the decades and centuries that follow, there will be an increasing radicalization. From the Canon Sicut Ait Beatus Leo of the Third Lateran Concile to the Decretal ad Abolendam, to the intervention of Innocent III and the Fourth Lateran Concile, especially the Vergentis Insenium, which by promoting the coincidence between the sin of heresy and the crimen lese majestatis, took the devised step to de-theologize the concept of heresy and imbue it with a strictly political meaning, allowing the condemnation for heresy to be used as an anathema against political enemies. The 13th and 14th centuries, limiting ourselves to those strictly pertaining to Dante, are dominated by this concept of heresy. As a Dantean example, we could mention the Colonna Cardinal Schism, which saw the powerful Roman family opposed to Papa Caetani. In reference to the plenitudo potestatis and the crime of lese majesty, they were deposed, excommunicated, interdicted from public offices, and their assets confiscated. The Pope urged inquisitors to proceed against the former cardinals. The rebellion against him constituted them as schismatics, and their punishment should be equated with that of heretics. Judicantes eo schismaticos et blasphemos, et in uius modis schismate persistent tamquam hereticus, puniendos. A formulation that allies the canonical equivalence between heretic and schismatic, with the former term aggravation, the latter. The Pope would later proclaim a crusade against the rebellion cardinals. Heresy is a political act that punishes the rejection of the acceptance of papal will. This unscrupulous use of heresy as a temporal weapon led to its widening scope, and in 1303, William of Nogaret, a professor of law and advisor to Philip IV, was able to accuse the Pope of being a hereticus manifestus and a corpore ecclesiae prorsus abscistus. However, it was not the first time that secular power had used the heretical charge, as Frederick II had already used against his political opponents. If heresy is a crime against majesty, then any power that considered itself as such was free to use it. In 1328, Louis the Bavarian deposed Pope John XXII on the charge of heresy. The concept of heresy was, therefore, a fundamental structure of medieval society, a tool in the hands of power, in particular the ecclesial institution, useful for asserting supremacy and silencing any form of dissent. The heresy, as a malinterpretatio of the salvific message, its doctrinal character, has lost centrality. It cannot and it will not be abandoned, but it can no longer be considered exclusive and will only function when related to the ecclesiological and therefore political reference. This juridical disciplinary formulation of the concept of heresy emerged very clearly in the reading of the Summe, drafted by canonists. To provide a well-known Dantean example, we can analyze the Summa Aurea by Enrico da Susa. Decried, I would say not by chance, in the Even of Wise by the poet, as distressed protagonist of the ecclesiastical propaganda for a legislation per lo mondo, and in Paradise 12, and in Epistola 11 as the contraltar of the Doctor of the Church, and as a person focused only on seeking census and benefits. In the Summa, the section dedicated to heretics is varied and somewhat confused catalog. Very similar or identical formulations are found in all the most important canonists, from Anselmo da Lucca to Goccione da Pisa, from Goffredo de Trano to Lorenzo Hispano and Siccardo da Cremona, but also in the Glossa Ordinaria to the Liber Sextus. First, we find an extended definition of the heretic, multitamen modis dicitur hereticus, largo sumpto vocabulo. Of course, any doubt about the articles of faith leads to infidelity, dubius enim infide hereticus dicitur et infidelis. This is followed by a longer and more articulated identifying series that relates the heretic to the Roman See. Every excommunicated person is an heretic, item excommunicatum nam, as they do not agree with the apostolic sees, omni qui non sunt, as you can read, thereby denying the privilege granted to the Church by Christ. Dicitur etiam hereticus, qui privilegium Romane ecclesiae ab ipso summo ecclesiarum capite traditum cunato offer. It is heretical not to seek communion with it. Qui communiam catholicae ecclesiae non recepit, transgress its command, qui transgreditur precepta sedis apostolice, and contravene its decrees, qui vult contravenire decreta epistolis apostolicis. In a narrow sense, anyone who understands the article of faith differently from what is established by the Church of Rome is an heretic, a stricto modo dicitur hereticus, qui aliter sentit, de articulis fidei quam Romana Ecclesia. However, the etymology of the term heretic is identified, and this sets the Ostians apart from many of its predecessors in its divisive action, not in its elective option. Dicitur autem hereticus ab heriscor ercisceris, id est divido dividis. Leading to the conclusion and assimilation of the heretic to the eremit, who separates himself from the others, and thus to the schismatic. Heresis dicitur divisio, id est separatio fide catholica, hereticor igitur vel schismatico. This association is confirmed in the final subheading, where, among other ways someone who can be defined as heretics, it is mentioned those who separate themselves from the unity of the Church. Sunt tali modi, quibus quis dici potest hereticus, qui se ab unitate ecclesia separat. Then follows the schismatic section. Immediately follow the schismatic section, a succession explained by stating that sometimes schisma inducit heresy. Schism is defined as an illicita divisio per inobedientiam ab universate ecclesiae facta. The difference between the two crimes lies in the fact that heresy has, at its origin, a perversion of dogma, which schism does not. The transition from schism to heresy occurs by persisting in schisms, meaning the refusal to return to the rank of the Church. It is the disobedience that leads to heresy. However, the reverse cannot occur. The relationship between the two sins is, in fact, like that inter genus et speciem, quia omnis hereticus et schismaticus sed non convertitur. Two things are evident here. Heresy is not necessary for schism to arise, and heresy is a more serious sin than schism. We are at the exact opposite of what we see in Dante. The semantic field of etymologies unites the two sins, also highlighting their divisive action. Schisma ab Grecum et dicitur ad scissura. Therefore, dicitur proprio schismaticus qui non recognoscit potestatem Romana Ecclesia, sic enim efficitur ovis externa ab ovili. In the next subheading, rotus ut sciant homines quam grave et quam detestabile sic hoc crimen, there is again a comparison with the crime of heresy. Alibi dicitur heresim esse maius inter crimina eo. Quod primum locum tenet in poenis. Tamen ex post schisma judicandum et confirmatum fuerit, idem est crimen, et utrique est poena eadem infligenda. Finally, in the intercepting note, it is interesting to note the reference to Frederick II, identified as a schismatic. De suabiam contra dominum Gregorius nonus schisma movit, et tandem per innocenti quartius deposit fuit concilio Lugduniensis. Therefore, Ostiense's Summa, on the topic of heresy, is lacking on doctrinal arguments, and focus in the shift from the concept of heresy to the definition of the heretic, emphasizing the opposition to Rome. In the combination of heresy and schism, with the former used as an aggravation of the latter, the heresy of disobedience emerges as a tool for controlling dissent, emptied of its theological implications. Considering what we have been expressed, we can now probably assess the significance of Dante's operation, which distinctly separates heresy and schism, comparing the structure of the Inferno with the legal arrangement imposed by the guardian of orthodoxy. The clear division and pronounced distance between the two sins already underscored the radical nature of Dante's thought, in the contrast of that of his contemporaries. The Florentine commentator Andrea Lancia, who in the 1337 served as a consul of the guild of judges and notaries, drawing on his legal expertise, comments. I will briefly read in Italian. Una questione si muove qui. Qual è maggiore peccato? O la infedeltade, della quale è trattato sopra nel canto 10º, o lo scisma, della quale si tratta nel presente canto. E secondo l'ordine di questo libro pare maggiore la scisma, poiché è dannata più a fondo dell'inferno. In contrario si argomenta così. Quello è maggiore peccato che opposito al maggior buono. Dio è sommo buono, lo quale è obietto della fede. Dunque la infedeltà è opposita e contraria a Dio, e la scisma è contraria dell'unione degli uomini. Minore bene è l'unione delle genti che Dio, dunque maggior peccato l'infedeltà che la scisma. Aristotele non conobbe la cattolica fede e l'autore poetizza secondo Aristotele. Having observed the divergence between legal precept and the structural arrangement carried out by the poet, the notary, unable to resolve the aporia, justified it with a brief reference to Aristotle, thus diffusing Dante's radicalism. However, this attitude is not surprising at all, given that the instance with which the early commentators of the Commedia tried to highlight Dante's orthodoxy has been demonstrated multiple times by the scholar. This separation allows us to evaluate how Dante was probably aware of the propagandistic alignment undertaken in the 2 previous centuries, and was still prevalent during his lifetime. The interpretive line of his structural vision seems to be confirmed by its phenomenological representation, namely Inferno 10. In addition to the clear structural separation, Dante adds the condemnation of an absolutely doctrinal heresy, such as that of those who make the soul dead with the body, l'anima col corpo morto fanno, as Dante states. For the heretics, which are Epicureans, so we also have an heresy which is outside the canonical list of condemned heretical movement, almost solely present in sermons of canonical list, and condemned heretical outside the canonical list of condemned heretical movements, almost almost solely present in the sermon of preachers and not used in issuing condemnation. Moreover, as we already seen, Ostiense classified Frederick II as a schismatic, and indeed he was condemned by the Church, whose deposition and excommunication were given for denying papal authority. It was, in short, a glaring case of heresy of disobedience. It is probably well known how in his chronicle Salimbene identifies the emperor as an Epicurean. Therefore, this Dante resemantization, unlike that of he will do for Farinata, does not occur ex novo, but in direction of perception, intention, and language, we can discern Dante's intention to select the option farthest from church political concept of heresy. I'm going to conclude. The poet re-theologizes the heretical concept of heresy. The poet re-theologized the heretical concept and, by clearly separating from schism, depoliticized it, openly contrasting what was affirmed by contemporary canon law. The sin of schism, detached from the heretical one, acquires exceptional gravity in the poet's formulation, because it goes against his ideal of unity and peace, leading him to relegate the disintegration actual of the sour to the depth of hell. In the episode of Schismatics, there is no mention of what we could define as the heretical component. Dolcino can therefore be compared to Mohammed, two of the schismatics condemned in Inferno 28, for the martial component that unites them, but for neither is there talk of heresy. In the just 6 verses, a lexicon dominated by war-related terms, armi, victoria, acquistar, which is weapon, victory, military weapon, conquer, prevails, and not a hint of doctrine arises from the text, seemingly excusing the presence of Dantean heresy intended in a Dantean way. Moreover, Muhammad himself seems to embody above all the figure of the military leader and fight for the faith, an image more suitable to the narrative context from which it emerged. In fact, the beginning of Inferno 28 already has a clear physical dimension. It is not at all intellectual, dominated by the unspeakability of violence and blood and bodily torment that characterize the Bulgari. There is no heresy in Dante's Dolcino because there is no theological error. There is only schism. Therefore, the simply data, if properly historicized, clearly highlights the counteraction to the precept propagated by the power in structuring Dante's Inferno. By rejecting the propagandistic alignment between schism and heresy, and creating a heresy based on points contrary to the faith and not to the hierocratic, Dante denies the Church's main tool of temporal competition and openly contrasts with what was affirmed by contemporary canon law. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuele, and sorry again for the technical problems. Okay, so now we can turn to our second speaker.
No question for Emanuele?
For Emanuele, question later. Okay. Question for we thought that question for both of them better to do at the conclusion of the panel. So we stick to the concept of heresy, and we pass to the second speaker, who is Francesca Tasca. Francesca got her PhD at the University of Padova, working on a project on the first generation of Waldensians. She's an expert in Waldensians. Her main research interests revolved around late antique and medieval minority Christian confession. She produced a great quantity of original research on this subject. She recently edited the first volume of the ponderous Storia dei Valdesi, published by Claudiana at the beginning of this year. Congratulations. And is co-author with Andrea Maraschi of the forthcoming volume, Boundary Foods and Boundaries of Food in the Middle Ages, Food as Identity and Religious Marker from Augustine to Nicolò of Poggibonsi. Welcome, Francesca, and thank you.
Thank you, Federica, for introducing me. And also, I'm very happy to be here in this wonderful location, really. So, okay. In 1174, Waldo, a wealthy resident of Lyon, made a radical decision to dispose of all his possessions and abandon his family, beginning a life of wandering preaching in complete poverty, following the apostolic model. In a short time, Waldo gathered around him both men and women, mostly lay individuals, who adopted his existential choice to go around the world in pairs, preaching the gospel in the vernacular. They sustained themselves by begging and relying on the generosity of others, placing their trust in the Pauline instruction that he who proclaims the gospel shall live by the gospel alone. The intervention of local ecclesiastical authorities was inevitable, with the aim of regulating, disempowering, and containing an initiative that posed a threat to hierarchical structure of Christian society. This structure was firmly rooted in the clear distinction between clergy, genus clericorum, and laity, genus laïcorum, especially with regards to proclamation of the Holy Word. 1180, a precarious agreement. In Lyon, likely in 1180, at the time of Archbishop Guichard, an agreement was reached between Waldo and the local ecclesiastical powers. Preserved in a codex at the National Library in Madrid, the resulting propositum of religious life conclude a declaration of faith by Waldo and his fratres, brethren. However, this propositum only emphasizes radical pauperism, with no mention of preaching whatsoever. The text asserts only the centrality of the pauperist choice, lived through rigorous mendicancy rooted in gospel teaching. The propositum openly state, and since faith, according to the Apostle James, without works is dead, we renounced the word, and, as the Lord advised us, we distributed all we had to the poor and resolved to be poor, so that we would not be solicitous for tomorrow, nor will we receive from anyone gold or silver or anything other than our daily food and clothing. We also propose to observe the evangelical advices as preset. Is this the authentic religious path of Waldo, or has his original intent undergone modifications, influenced by formula stratifications, negotiation, and compromises? The hypothesis we suggest here is that we are dealing with a formulation that has emerged from partial amputations. The text of the propositum is the result of attempts by ecclesiastical institutions to diminish the potency of Waldo intuition within a compromising perspective. Nevertheless, concealed beneath the heavy cloak of pauperism and mendicancy, we can discern the strong and original essence of Waldo's proposition, the apostolic mission of itinerant proclamation of the gospel by simple lay people. To unveil this apostolic core, it is essential to direct our attention to a biblical recurrence contained in the propositum, Matthew 10. Especially going back to the overall biblical text helps uncover the deeper meaning behind a quotation out of context. The rejection of gold. The rejection of gold, silver, and money is indeed found within a crucial extract from the Matthew Gospel. This directive is a part of the guidance Christ provided when sending his apostles to spread the message of the kingdom around the world. In the Matthew pericope, the 12 apostles are sent to announce the imminent kingdom of heaven with precise operational instruction regarding how to conduct themselves and preach on the road. The renunciation of gold and silver is consequently linked to chapter 10 of Matthew, where the apostolic mission is precisely outlined, emphasizing preaching in poverty, while journeying, receiving hospitality in friendly homes, and engaging in healing activities, both physical and spiritual. Among the instruction given by Jesus to the apostles within that impactful gospel page that we believe may have influenced Waldo, only the mendicant condition stays in the propositum, a text produced by ecclesiastical authorities. In essence, what should have served as the apostle's distinctive uniform, i.e. poverty, is reduced to a self-contained, comprehensive, and conclusive identity. In the text of the propositum, the reason and apostolic dimension of the mendicant physiognomy are almost entirely dissolved. Pauperistic scriptural fragments extracted from their original biblical context are woven together but stripped of any universal missionary purpose. The propositum appears to convey only an individual pursuit of perfection. This pursuit be easily inserted into a group that ecclesiastical hierarchies aim to define, as well as integrate within the broader and organized Societas Christiana. Moreover, this crystallized structure is not contested in the propositum. Indeed, this is the meaning of the final words in the propositum. We confess and we believe that by doing alms and other good works with their own property, those who remain in the worldly life and have a possession will be saved. The formulation proposed by the official ecclesiastical document positions almsgivings and other charitable works in a complementary relationship with the pauperistic mendicant way of life. The reciprocity between the recipient, those who have renounced possessions, and the benefactors, those who still have belongings, reaffirms a fundamental order. Waldo's proposal not only appears to refrain from challenging this order, but conversely seems to perfectly align with it, providing further confirmation. The clarification regarding the distinction between precept and council's advices is also intending to be understood in this manner. The type of pauperism that emerges is not, in essence, antagonistic to the organization of society. It does not pose a threat to its stratifications, roles, order, and power structures. On the contrary, it affirms them all. It is worth noting that in the society of that era, the term pauper did not only refer to those without means of survival, but more broadly included the defenseless, the weak, and the subordinate. Essentially, pauper wasn't the opposite of rich, dives. Pauper stood as the opposite and complementary term to potens, powerful. The choice of poverty, as articulated in the propositum, signifies a choice of powerlessness. This choice does not challenge the existing status quo and its hierarchies, but rather submits to them. It represents a form of marginality that is integrated into the overall organization of the urban and Christian society of that time. The textual composition carried out by the ecclesiastical chancelleries successfully transformed the plea for recognition presented by a group of itinerant lay preachers, primarily from the lay state, into the acknowledgement of a religious mendicant group. Consequently, the source reveals a phase during which ecclesiastical authorities sought to dilute the challenging apostolic path of the layman Waldo, and for a brief period they succeeded. They narrowed it down to the radicality of pauperism, but understood in terms of personal perfection, in harmonic relation to the existing order. The propositum replaced a consequence, it has poverty, with its cause, the itinerant apostolic mission. However, this turned out to be a transient solution. Within barely 3 years, the institutional strategy proved ineffective, exposing its shortcomings as it deviated from Waldo's genuine apostolic intent. It was not Waldo and his brethren, his followers, who a few years later breached the agreement preserved in the source produced by the hierarchies and ecclesiastical powers. Instead, it was the agreement itself that betrayed the foundational principle of Waldo's proposal, reducing and adapting it to what could be accepted without conflict. 1182, expulsion from Lyon. In 1181-1182, John of Canterbury, former bishop of Poitiers, became archbishop in Lyon, succeeding Archbishop Guichard. It was during this period that the expulsion of Waldo from the city of Lyon occurred. Hence, around 8 years elapsed between Waldo's religious conversion in 1174 and his expulsion from Lyon in 1182. In the year 1181, both the archbishop and the pope changed. In Lyon, from Guichard of Pontigny to John of Canterbury. In Rome, from Alexander III to Lucius III. Guichard's successor, John of Canterbury, also called Jean Belmain, coming from the crucial episcopal see of Poitiers, presented himself in Lyon as a man of order and institutions. Before coming to Lyon, he had been a leading man in the intricate events surrounding the Thomas Becket case, with whom he had sided, standing up to the King of England, but remained, in the same time, one of his most loyal men. He had participated in the Third Lateran Council and was considered a respectable and cosmopolitan ecclesiastic. Completely external to the Lyon environment, he was extraneous to the economic and personal relation and local balances that had preceded his arrival in the city. Exactly this network of relations maybe could have had a role in the development of Waldo's affair in the previous years. When John of Canterbury arrived in Lyon from Poitiers, he recorded the anomaly of these new apostles. The institutional attempt of 1180 aimed at weakening the Waldo's apostolic intent into mere pauperism had not really succeeded. And in the city where the archbishop wielded both civil and religious power, John of Canterbury finally expelled Waldo because Waldo was not only incompatible with the order, but indeed he was threatening to the order of which the archbishop himself was the apex. Therefore, the layman and apostle Waldo and his disciples, no longer compatible with the established frameworks of power and society, were expelled from Lyon. And Waldo of Lyon then became, more precisely, Waldo expelled from Lyon, excluded not only from the city walls, but also from the overall structure of ecclesiastical and civil powers of the city, of which he had been a part until a few years earlier. 1184, the heretical condemnation. While religious pauperism was tolerated in the urban setting as a form of marginality, any challenge to the established order was totally rejected, and it led to irrevocable expulsion. It is essential to recall that Archbishop John himself was in Verona in the autumn of 1184, one of the many archbishops and princes who from the various areas of the empire gathered together with the Pope Lucius III and the Holy Roman Emperor Federico Barbarossa against the heresy for the issuing of the decretal ad abolendam. One can then fully understand the terms in which the heretical condemnation is formulated against those who falsely call themselves Pauperes de Lugduno, poor men of Lyons, in 1184. First of all, we lay under a perpetual anathema the Cathars and Patarins and those who falsely call themselves umiliati and poor men of Lyon, the Passagini, the Josefini, the Arnaldiste. And since some, having a form of godliness, arrogate to themselves the right to preach, we include in the same perpetual anathema anyone who dares to preach in public or in private, either being forbidden or not sent, or who lacks the authority of the apostolic see or of the local ordinary. Referring to the apostolic model as conveyed in the scriptures, especially Matthew chapter 10, the threat posed by Waldo's religious proposition did not lie in challenging money and wealth, but rather in questioning the structure of the Societas Christiana as it had crystallized over the centuries. This structure was characterized by its hierarchical organization and distinct division into genus clericorum, clergy, and genus laikorum, lay people. In the decretal ad abolendam, the dismissal of the pauperistic label, those who falsely call themselves the poor men of Lyon, might be explained by the fact that for Waldo and his followers, poverty was merely a secondary and not exclusive attribute of their religious way of life. This way of life is instead defined by apostolic activities contrary to the terms agreed upon in the Propositum of 1180. Therefore, the text of the condemnation of Verona addresses the issue of unauthorized preaching, condemning independently of the content of the preaching itself. Pauperism could be and had been accepted because it did not challenge power relations and power structures. Indeed, it confirmed them. The pauper's condition was a condition of submission and social subalternity. The lay apostolic choice, external to any institutionalized position, had instead in potentia the power to shake the order of Christian society, Christian societas, to its roots. Therefore, it was condemned as heresy and persecuted. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, and I think it's now time for questions. So, Francesca again wanted to ask a question to Emanuele, if I'm not mistaken.
I would have a question for Emanuele. Posso?
Sì.
Okay. I would like to know the opinion, the Emanuele opinion about the great absence, heresy absence in Divina Commedia, Cathars. What's your opinion, Emanuele? You know there are many hypotheses about this question.
Yeah, sure.
If you want, you can answer in Italian, I would say.
Better in Italian.
Looking at your face.
Okay, I will try in English. Let's say like this. I do not expect from Dante to talk about everything was surrounding him. And I think we should not worry about what is not in the comedy and take care of what is in the comedy. Then moving to the Carter itself, without talking about without considering the comedy, I would say that the last book, probably the last book that we had on the Carter matters, I think that clearly, or not clearly, but at least highlights how it is very possible that a movement as the Carter one, at least as we have thought about in the last centuries, it may not exist. And if we don't if the Carters didn't exist as we always have thought about it, we should not worry about the fact that Dante is not talking about them. Instead, we should take that as an option that goes in that direction. And I will also add that all the ancient commenters, except from, let's say, one or two, one for sure, but the other one is arguably, do not talk about Carter. So Dante is not talking about Carters. The ancient comments are not talking about Carters. I can see why it is interesting to us to talk about it, but without having further knowledge, it is impossible to say why Dante is not talking about them. But I'm strongly convinced that any supposition that talks about Dante being a Cathar or blah, 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 whatever, it should be strongly refused. And this approach, the one that wants Dante to be a Cathar, a Templar, a Patarinian, whatever, it is one of the main reasons why the topic on heresy, on Dante's heresy, Dante's concept of heresy, has suffered a disinteresse over the years. Did I address your question?
Grazie.
Okay, and any other questions? Okay, come here. We can have the
Okay. I tried.
I'm trying to. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a bit better. So my question is about influences and like being inspiring. So did Waldo used only like line from a Bible to like make this apostolic idea about way of life, or maybe he was inspired also with the life of some science, or maybe because I noticed that many guys like him were also inspired by some predecessors or some science, maybe local science or something. Mm-hmm. And like a part of this question, maybe some genetical influences, maybe some like next leaders of some religious movements used literally his ideas, and maybe in later centuries. Yeah, thank you.
There are two questions. Okay.
Two similar questions.
I try to answer in English, but I'm not sure about my English confidence. Okay. We have another source, Chronicon of Lyon, anonymous author, and he wrote about Waldo's conversion, and according to his narrative, Waldo was inspired by the legend of Saint Alexis. Okay, he would have had listened to La Légende de Saint Alexis on the square by Ciarrocchi, and it was very moved by his story. But I'm not so sure about the authenticity and the affidability of this source. It's more a geography. It's almost a geography, not a real history. And so, yes, there is also this version about Waldo's conversion. The second question was about
the second question was, did his example inspired some?
There is a big discussion about the Waldo's influence on Francis' life, but we have no evidence.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will also have two questions. The first one is, so if these new movements were responses to the lack of individual perfection in the church teaching and so on, so how church reacted in this time, because it was time of many reforms, so they cannot just prohibit new movements, they should react in some other ways. So that's my first question. And the second one is, so maybe what is your opinion why later mendicants were approved? So because there are a lot of different opinions why they were approved finally, because they were different or because there were too many of those movements and so on. So what is your personal opinion on that?
The last one was, why was mendicants approved?
Yeah, like later some mendicant orders became.
Mendicants is not against structure, okay? It's not against structure, mendicancy. Preaching is against structure. This is the core of the problem. And so no problem about mendicant religious order. The problem is about lay preaching order or lay preaching group. This is not antagonistic in front of the structure, hierarchical and ecclesiastical structure. So no problem with mendicants. The first one was
about church reaction on this.
Okay. Church reaction was very articulated. Okay, there was for a time attempt to in italiano, un tentativo di riprendere tutti questi movimenti.
To include them in the official church.
The official church. And after they use also violence and coercitio.
question.
I think she asked more about kind of reform.
Yeah, so
church,
this
like
responds to the lack of individual perfection inside the church. So how church made this individual perfection then possible outside of these movements?
Se c'era una specie di controriforma.
We had the Gregorian Reformation, first of all, and then in the 13th century we had, for example, different new orders, but c'erano comunque già gli ordini monastici. Per la perfezione individuale, c'erano gli ordini monastici, non è quello il problema. La perfezione individuale non è un problema.
She's saying individual perfection has always been seen as the way for the monks. There was the monasticism, the main road to attain perfection. At the time of Waldo, if you are a lay people, you were not expected to be perfect from a Christian point of view.
And to preach.
Yes, what I myself wanted to ask you, while I was drafting the program with the organizing committee, I was under the impression that the marginal category you would spoke about were the heretics, but after hearing to your paper, I think that the real marginal category are the lays. The lay people, i laici.
Also poor men.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. But it seems to me that the distinction, the duo sunt genera Christianorum, the big division between clergy and lay is the fundamental issue. And I was wondering how aware, quale consapevolezza c'era between the Waldensians, between Waldo and of this issue. Of the contrast between laity and clergy. Were they aware of this?
The awareness was very strong. We have a source of Waldo's disciple, and he wrote, we know that Jesus Christ called Waldo because Waldo was a simple lay, exactly like first apostle. First, they were fishermen, simple fishermen, and Waldo is the new apostle because he is a simple lay, exactly like the apostles. So the awareness was very strong.
And reconnecting to Olga's question, do you think that at the time of Waldo was there a strong need for individual perfection in lays, or do you think that Waldo introduced this concept? Because we are used to this idea, but I think we had this idea from Francis, from mendicants, that also lay are called to perfection. But I think that in a high medieval church, it was exactly as you said before. I mean, perfection was the road for monks. If you are lay, you were called to a minor perfection. What do you think on this issue?
This is the Waldo problem. This is also, in my opinion, modernity in Waldo proposal. And it was not è stato un precursore da questo punto di vista.
È stato il primo, secondo te?
Anche per the translation of Bible in the vernacular, not only for your personal reading at home, okay, there were lay people at home with vernacular Bible. It was okay, but the difference was, okay, I have a translated Bible, and I go in streets, in squares, and I preach the vernacular Bible. This is the big difference.
And it's just another aspect of marginality, like linguistic marginality, using vernaculars, using common language and reaching common people and so on. Any other question? If we have no other question, I think we can have 10 minutes of pause, and we can start again.
Sorry for my English.
No, it was quite good.
Everyone
5 to 12, okay, for the second panel. Thank you. Okay, here we are. Sorry for the wait. And now we are going to start with our second panel, which is about gender issues, which is one of the core topic of the Fondazione Ernesta Besso. So we are quite happy to speak about women, to speak about gender relations. So I go on presenting you the speaker of this second panel. And our first speaker is Dr. Hanna Filipova. She's an early modern historian and is now a postdoc at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. She is Ukrainian, and she graduated at the Department of History of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv and got her PhD at the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, worked in several Ukrainian scientific institutions, and her research interests cover the political ideology of the Russian Empire, propaganda during the Great Northern War, queer and gender history, about which we will speak today, othering in early modernity, prisoners of war during the Great Northern War. She is at the University of Gothenburg since 2022, and she is currently working on the project Dialogues, Disputes and Battles, Propaganda during the Great Northern War. Thank you, Anna. Welcome.
Thank you so much for this great opportunity to talk about great things in great company. So let's start. I will try to figure out how all this works. Yeah.
You just click
on okay. Yeah. This is my current topic, and I have to say that the idea of this paper coming from my current upcoming book dedicated to this gender issues. So this book will be about perception of homosexual behavior of Russian Tsar Peter I by his contemporaries. So this is like theoretical part, started like theoretical part of this book, but I decided that it's more than just theory, and now I'm happy that I have opportunity like to publish it wider as a chapter. Yeah, so let's start from the end. In the beginning of 18th century in Russia, it was a period of enormous social changes during the Petrine reforms, and it's interesting that only in this period the first attempt to regulate things now perceived as homosexual behavior, because in that time they hadn't this concept of homosexuality, of course, and it was a part of this umbrella term sodomy, like unnatural sexuality. So the first attempt to regulate it by secular law were made by Peter I. Mainly it was about military discipline, so it wasn't about secular life of people, and it was expressed in a few documents like short code, Article Kratky, military code, Article Voensky, and military regulations, and so on. So few of them. Here you can see the quotation, how it worked, or was supposed to work. So the main things was it was the first time in Russian history when homosexual behavior was supposed to be punished by death. But a little spoiler, in reality it didn't work. And the first time here we can see that the sex between adult men and sex between adult man and boy was like punished in the same way, but mainly in case of sexual violence. So this is important. And of course, the main things in Peter's military legislation were borrowed from European tradition, mainly Northern European, and basically all these articles, codes, and documents were borrowed from Emperor Karl V's code. And Swedish code of King Karl XI was the most influential in Russian case, because they had a war with Swedes and many cultural contacts and so on. In this period, the 18th century, the end of 17th, beginning of 18th century, is very important for European, at least European perception of homosexuality, because in this period the main persecution processes started in many reasons, and it was like reflected in military area. Okay, but now I will tell you how it was in pre-Petrine Russia, because it was totally different. My sources are the main sources, at least. They covers a huge time frame from like 10th, 11th century to 18th century. This is penitential questionnaires. Canon books. Canon books, it's like also called in Russia like pilot books. It's like tips for a proper spirituality and proper daily life. How to be a good Christian in Orthodox way. Didactic teachings by many important and influential representatives of earlier Russian, or not earlier Russian clergy, and all these sources were based on earlier tradition, Byzantine and Balkan works, and in early Slavic and Kievan Rus works. So Russians borrowed a lot from works of Kiev authors, for example. And the next source, legislative acts. I think mainly it's a book of 100 chapters of 16th century, and they weren't so sodomy was mentioned not so frequent in this kind of sources in pre-Petrine Russia. And household and family rules and tips, for example, famous Domostroy, is very related to a book of 100 chapters, and sometimes some ecclesiastical court records. So like the main division between Eastern and Western cases in this time is that in Western Europe, court cases, sodomy trials are one of them, like basic main sources to this problematic, but in Orthodox it's not. So a few words about perception, basic perception of homosexuality in Muscovite Tsardom or kingdom. So sexual culture in Muscovite Tsardom was very closely related to religious culture. Sometimes they were like inseparable. And it's a very important thing about it. So all persecution, categorization, and so on were in the field of Orthodox Church and moral legislation, like Domostroy, for example. So it's not officially like law, but important source for understanding of their moral things. As in Western tradition, homosexuality, sodomy, was categorized as unnatural sex. So what is natural sex? It's a sexual activity not directed to conception. And as in Western case, it was based on biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's why sodomy. And but the main thing to understand Russian legislation in this case, it's that they hadn't like proper explanation what is sodomy itself. And in Russia, it was part of concept of fornication, blood. So it's very wide category. It's everything except sex in heterosexual sex in marriage, basically. Orthodox authors of didactics, for example, they understood that this fornication, wide category of fornication, was the main reason for a destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and sometimes they are not specified in this case like sexual practices. Another category of masculinity, so it was interconnected with the concept of subordination or dissubordination and some sexual categories. For example, in some cases, sodomy was related to dissubordination in monasteries. So the idea itself was like how men have to be submitted to the God's will. That's the same way, socially inferior subjects as women, children, animals, and others have to be submitted to man's will. And here we are talking about some kind of spine of this idea of subordination to a natural course of things. Like God is a nature and God's wills is a natural. If you are like denying this concept, you are unnatural. And sexual actions in this case were connected with social actions, of course. It was considered as a sin, for example, for men to shave a beard. It's a very famous thing about Muscovite Kingdom. And it was violated in Petrine times with the new trends in men's fashion. And wearing a long hair, because it's making a proper man's image closer to female face or even like animal's face. For example, Daniel, the Metropolitan of Moscow, said that absence of the beard was like one of the main signs of effeminacy and homosexuality. So if man shaving his beard, he is probably homosexual, like practicing sodomy. And another thing, it's idea of responsibility. So man should be responsible for his social and sexual acting. And now we are coming closer to this idea about adolescent males. If they are young, they are not men yet, because they hadn't beard yet, and they have less social and sexual responsibility. According to sources, for example, young men accused of sodomy could be punished more mild than adult men. And the worst thing that 2 adult men were accused of sodomy. The older were the participants of this improper sexual interaction, the more severe was the punishment. And we were talking during the previous session about personal modesty and being like a perfect Christian. So in Russia of this time, like perfect male Christian is the man who's supposed to be sexually satisfied only with his wife and only in a proper heterosexual way, so for producing children. But if he cheated to his wife or so, it wasn't very important with a boy or with girl, for example. But as I said, the age of the sinners was very important, and same-sex interactions before reaching maturity were considered a minor sin, especially for children, boys under 10 years, because they hadn't this responsibility and committed sins without understanding. As I said, boys were not traditionally perceived as full-fledged males. Here we can talk about this fluid gender of boys, very similar to the same concept in Mediterranean region. So this is one of the main points of my speech, that Russian traditions of percepting of homosexuality were in this field of Mediterranean things. And some interesting things I noticed that this concept of homosexuality of young men was linked with the idea of beauty. So it's not important for a proper man to be beautiful because he have another futures. But one of my colleagues once told me that in old Russian language they had even a special word connected with a beauty, and this word was euphemism for a sodomite. So it's very important. And some connections with the symbolism of food. So in some didactic works, homoerotic desire was linked with the eating of a delicious food or drinking delicious drinks. So it's, I think it's very important, and it have a lot of similarities in Western European culture, so we can talk about it later. Sometimes it's linked even with the folkloric stories, and my favorite story is about favorite and friend of Emperor Peter I, Alexander Menshikov, who in his youth, allegedly, it's like folkloric plot, but very popular, sold pies or kvass, it's like drink, like not alcoholic beer, and nuts. And then, thanks to his beauty and wit and so on, became a Tsar's lover and made his brilliant career. So here we can notice this semantic connection. And in 16th century, we have another interesting example that in city of Sviazhsk, Metropolitan Macarius said that many men, due to closeness to this Muslim frontier, because it was during the Russian conquest of Siberia and so on, they were very into raping local boys and having even some affairs with them. And it seems interesting because Western European stereotypes about Russian homosexuality and this wild barbaric image of Russia explained in the same way their wild sexual customs as wild sexual customs of Muslims. So it's like a very traditional ways of othering to say that this barbarian is sexually wild and improper. Yeah, and these descriptions sometimes they are like similar templates, similar phrases. Again, about templates. And I like this particular example. Here you can see the main components of this Western European othering. So beastly lust, being like not like a man but like an animal. The monster, this word in early modern word was used for a marking like something unnatural. So monster, it's not only monster in modern understanding, it's some creature who lives outside of God's will. And this Muscovite barbarian, according to this English poet, is more desires a boy within his bed than his own wife or some girl wench. So this is a very typical, and this is very interesting because it says that understanding and perceptions of these sexual customs were very different between like Western and Eastern traditions, and that's why all these people who came or allegedly came to the Muscovite Kingdom, they didn't understand how it works here, and yeah, they described these things. Finally, it's like theory and conclusions in the same time. So the attitude of Muscovites in early modernity toward the same-sex desire was under the influence, direct influence of Byzantine and Balkan traditions, and in this way,
also it was very related to ancient Greek concept of pederastia, for example. And the turning point occurred during the reign of Peter I, when these Eastern and traditions of antiquity met Western, Northern European traditions in the same time. But it never works properly in Russia, so it's another question, but anyway. And the regulation of sexual mores passed. But it's like a field of transgression, you know. The perception of adolescent males as sub-men before appearance of facial hair and some certain age sometimes. Yeah, it's echoes ancient Greek and partly Roman traditions of pederasty and and this binary idea of gender. Homoerotic perception of boys were expressed in terms of effeminate beauty itself, concern of appearance, for example, shaving a beard or using perfumes or makeup or something, and food symbolism. And finally, it's reflected the Orientalist stereotypes about the Muscovites constructed by Western European observers. And the closest analogy was like Ottoman Empire, because in this period when Ottoman Empire appears like a strong actor in Mediterranean region after the fall of Constantinople, the stereotypes, Orientalist stereotypes, reflected also some political and military anxiety about presence of the other. So it's very comparable. And finally, the final things, that the processes of westernization were important both in Russian and Ottoman Empire, and the processes of westernization were the starting point of this process of another legislation in a field of perception of homosexuality. So in simpler words, it's starting of stronger persecution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanna, for this compelling presentation. I enjoyed it very much. Now, unfortunately, Carolina Gualda Silva is not there. She was from Brazil, but this morning she texted me that she had a family emergency, so we will directly pass to our second speaker. We move from east to west. You can stay, but maybe better to switch places.
Maybe let's switch,
because she will have to use the computer. We are moving to our second speaker. So we move from east to west. Now we move to Spain with María del Camil Dolz Martorell. She is from Mallorca, from Islas Baleares. She got her PhD from the Università des Illes Balears. Her main research interest revolves around the economic and fiscal history of the Isle of Mallorca in the 15th century. She recently followed a new line of research, of which she will speak today, concerning the participation of women to financial activities in the Kingdom of Mallorca. And for this reason, she is part of the research network Grupo de Estudios sobre la Mujer en España y las Américas, which studies the condition of women in the Spanish-speaking world before the 19th century. So, benvenuta Maria. Thank you for speaking in English for us. And
good morning, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank the organization of the Congress for allowing me to participate in it. For everything, thank you very much. Firstly, under the title, the woman as administrator of the title belonging to the chapter of the Cathedral of Mallorca, it is to demonstrate the importance, the leading role the Mallorcan woman had in the field of finance and speculation in through title management. To begin with, it must be taken into account that from the late medieval period onward, a new stereotype of woman appeared, apart from the pre-established order until then, that is aristocrats, religious, women, or workers of rural area. We could dare to suggest that since the 15th century, the situation of women has undergone a decisive evolution. Since at the moment, she's looking for more modern, innovative professional pursuits, to leave household chores on the back burner. So she focuses on opting for paid jobs outside the home. In this sense, therefore, it must be taken into account when validating the image that was held towards the female sex through the medieval period. So it is difficult to determine if during the Middle Age there was a transformation or a regression in the situation, due to the fact that it was a period during which a set of transformations were experienced in the relation to the society, culture, and customs. But the misogynist conception of medieval Europe was a palpable and justified fact, which led, as is clear, to the oppression of a family sex. This unhealthy inheritance already had its first defenders in a classical era. For example, Aristotle himself in his work Politics expressed the existing difference between men and women, always considering males in a situation of superiority over females. For his part, St. Augustine d'Hipona also expressed his arguments towards the female sex, advocating that the woman should be a behind subject to the male figure, since the man is the more dignified sex, honorabilitor. In Augustinian thought, women were considered weak people, both physically and intellectually. In this way, females could be relegated to three functions: that the temptress as an instrument of the devil, that of wife as an instrument of the husband, and that of mother as an instrument of good. At the same time, Tertullian, the father of the church, defined the woman as an evil element, closer to the devil than to good. To all these misogynist voices, we must add the conception that emerges from Saint Thomas d'Aquino, who relied on the premise presented by Aristotle, and which he defended in his work De Generatione Animalium, where he justified himself by transcribing that the woman was like a frustrated man, un varón impotente, decimos. The same author, in his work Summa Theologica, in question 92 of the first part, enumerated what were the origins of the woman and how she had to be subordinate to the male figure. In this context, it must be borne in mind that during the Middle Age, the Catholic Church achieved great spheres of political, economic, and social power, which contribute to its ability to influence and interference in the morality and ideology of time. Therefore, following the postulates defended on the thrones of the temples, the sex of the people was one of the circumstances that modified their legal capacity. The woman had to live in a position of weakness. Her fragility was linked to her biological and intellectual inferiority. It had to be the male priority that came before any other interest, leaving the woman relegated to the background. The Catholic Church decided to demonize, is correct? Demonize the woman, a direct descendant of Eve, She was the one to blame for the situation of humanity. Eva, emblem of Genesis, endowed woman with a series of negative traits. They were associated with evil, darkness, imperfection, deception, and desire. Therefore, Eva was accused to be found guilty of original sin, blending woman and sexuality and dishonor. The Church was determined in a firm way to deny woman a condition of equality with respect to men. It was from 12th century when the view of female population improved on the part of clergy, basically thanks to rise of the cult of Virgin Mary. Mary was conceived as the most virtuous creature that had ever existed. The religious emphasized the admiration towards the image of Virgin Mary, characterized by her compassion and maternal concern. Mary was a divine and unapproachable woman. Her figure was linked to the spectre to the Redeemer and Savior, to divine grace of Mother and Virgin. She was inviolable purity. Virginity, together with a motherhood, became the Marian sign for excellence. Mother was not a woman, only mother and a virgin. At the beginning of the 13th century, with the rise of the bourgeoisie in the cities, a whole series of structural changes appeared that favored the position of women in the society of the time. The development of the new social class, the flourishing of cities, the secularization of urban life made it possible to increase the rights and attribution of women. But despite all these transformations, de facto to the dual conception that was held of women, researching the conclusion that they all come from the negative figure of Eva. It was necessary to comply with the feminine physical ideal that existed through in the Middle Age. The feminine physical ideal started from the basis that the woman's body was conceived as an instrument of provocation and sin. Therefore, the perfect image of that, of a tall woman with a long blonde hair and a thin body with thin hips, small white hands and small breasts. Regarding the facial features, this started from an oval face, highlighting the small eyes and nose, as well as pink as freshly lips and rosy cheeks. Within this set of physical characteristics, the whiteness of skin could not be missing, a symbol of purity and enjoying a certain social position. But the perfect woman, a part of embodying all the physical qualities, also had to have a whole series of moral attributes. Thus, she had to be chaste, prudent, hardworking, honest, quiet, beautiful, submissive, passive, and capable of procreating. Dominant among all, the virtue of chastity. See. Given all this information, the objective of the present investigation are basically based on an exhaustive analysis of evolution and behavior of the title as perceived by the chapter of the Cathedral of Mallorca. It is intended to record that, despite the woman through the medieval period was regarded as a second-class citizen who lived in a situation of subordination, In a mentally patriarchal society, in the case of the Kingdom of Majorca, they were the ones who were able to enjoy certain prerogatives, which allowed them to leave the private spheres and be present actively in different occupations, among which was the administration of the title. In this sense, thanks to the capitular documentation, it is clear that the Majorcan woman, widow, married, or good mother, intervened directly in the management of taxes. Therefore, it is made clear with the present research that the woman in the Kingdom of Majorca through the Middle Age acquired a whole series of important economic and social roles, signing contracts, expanding their negotiation horizons, encouraging female the economic power of Majorca. Likewise, to emphasize, at the same time, that is the first time in Balearic historiography that the woman is presented as a protagonist of commercial and financial activities, giving visibility to those who participate in commercial management and in the same status as men. We could dare to say that the women of Majorca enjoyed a series of freedoms and guarantees to allow them to play an important role in the kingdom finance. The origins of this advantageous situation go back to the Roman times. Roman law in the island is considered for many scholars as the lex hereditas, remaining part of the legal tradition of the Balearic island. As for the concept of patrimony, among the Romans, it was conceived as a set of economic rights that a person has, and that are maintained in a unified way by a series of interests. The heritage could be handed over from one person to another, according to their will. Therefore, the Romans considered it as a fundamental participle the absolute freedom of the owner in relation to the goods that constitute their heritage, allowing them to act arbitrarily in terms of the disposition of his goods. In Rome, only natural persons, such as the father of family, the woman sui juris, freedmen, or pilgrims were true subjects with rights. With the entry into the Middle Age, basically from the 13th century with respect to the Kingdom of Majorca, with the Christian contest of the island by the Catalan Aragonese monarch Jaume I, with the firm intention to encourage the repopulation of Muslim lands, the king granted the whole series of advantage through the Carta Populationis or Carta de Poblament. In the Majorcan case, the settlement charter was drawn up in 1230, the famous and well-known Carta de Franquesa, where the rights and privileges that the new settlers of Ireland would enjoy were transcribed, becoming in itself in a very progressive constitution with obvious influence of the Carta de Tortosa incorporate innovative content. Però, thanks to establishing the legislation, Majorcan women enjoyed a beneficial situation compared to other peninsular territories, as it could be, for example, in the Crown of Castile, For these reasons, we can find them working as a title midwife. Through the study of decimal incomes, there has been evidence of the active participation of women in a financial and commercial business. Drawing an image of women linked to the mercantile and speculative world. Regarding the civil status of these title administrators, they were for the most part married women. In this sense, the wives were value assistant to their partners in the different family business in which men and women signed contracts and commitments as a unit. Thus, Mallorcan women played an important role, always from the point of view of optimizing family research. In addition, thanks to the embargo of mercantile law, a married woman could maintain the status of an independence and defend herself as housewife if she traded separately from her husband. So, in this context, it should be borne in mind that in the Kingdom of Mallorca relations between spouses were more flexible. For this reason, especially among of bourgeoisie class, marriage was considered an association of common goods. Legal responsibility and good knowledge of transactions of the forms in which their husband and themselves participate necessarily involved having mercantile knowledge and of accounting and laws. Consequently, they had a visible place within the group of financiers and merchants coming together to title action, that is to say, to manage the transactions of their relatives. Jacob. In the canonical portion, contrary to the royal heritage, the preeminence of women as midwife was known in the parishes of Sineu Sant Joan. As for the number of women bearing the burden, it is lower in a relation of the royal heritage. In this case alone, 90 examples have been documented. This sense, this behavior is not strange due to the fact that, in some way, both titles were interrelated with each other, a fact that is justified, above all, in the parishes of Mallorca, which had a large stretch of land on which to establish a rain-fed agriculture based on a cultivation of cereals. This, after being harvested and collect the grains that remain stable, was used to feed the herdsmen and hence the agricultural specialization and complementarity. Estas son las parroquias donde, si lo puedes decir, las parroquias más importantes donde aparece el mayor número de mujeres.
In the map you can see the main parishes and the parishes with the greatest number of women.
Sí. Jacob. The links of capitular mensa capitular, have turned out to be a very valuable search. Since to the one hand, they have made it possible to shed light of the woman who worked as midwife of the title. But at the same time, it has been possible to carry out a more careful research, which has led to the fact that it's possible to know the administration more deeply. So much so that they were able to decipher their parish of origin. In the case of being married, the name of the husband, if they invested in one or more tites on the same date, at the same time, if they leased to fee decimal of the royal part and of the chapter in a year. In addition, if they bid for the lease a couple of years in a row, to the point of being able to know the professional dedication of the husband. In addition, some members of the same family as midwife of the tite, constituting themselves in some way as a mercantile society. In the conclusions, the idea that medieval society was marked by a theological and virile vision in which the conception of woman was of total subordination to the male figure. In the case of the Kingdom of Majorca, there is a very innovative aspect and progressive regarding the civil and progressive status of woman. Thanks to the study of the evolution of the tites received by the chapter, it is established that in Majorca there was an original female participation in a financial life, and that, at the same time, they became an element that helped the economic development of the kingdom. In addition, the fact that women were participating and living elements of financial and mercantile orbit of Majorca. In medieval times meant that there was a certain equality between the sexes in the face of masculinistic world. The small research shows that Mallorcan women were familiar with finance, a very important issue, both at historical, social, economic, and political level, given that it implies in some way a reduction of the existing structural barriers at the time medieval. Based on the present analysis, a new line of research opens where the main protagonist will be women, seen as people with financial, speculative, and task functions. Thank you. Sorry for my English, it's very bad for that.
Okay, now, are there any questions for our two speakers? Francesca, come here and take the gelato.
I have a question for Hanna and a question for Maria. For Hanna, in your sources, are there any evidence about homosexual relationships in school setting, in educational setting, and are there the punishment more severe in this case or not? This is a question for you. Per te in italiano è meglio?
Sì, meglio.
Ok, benissimo,
Meglio,
anche per
meglio,
me.
meglio,
Anche per me.
meglio.
Io non sono molto d'accordo con la tua esposizione perché hai sempre parlato di donne sposate, married women.
Sì.
Hai trovato donne non sposate e non vedove che hanno queste funzioni?
Sì.
Grazie.
Ok. Grazie.
Thank you so much for your question. So the first, no, but there are certain reasons for that. In that period, so I'm mainly talking about like Muscovite Kingdom, so it's like end of 15th, beginning of the 18th century, they hadn't like regular schools. So we cannot talk about this, I know what you mean, like school, homosocial environment. Yeah, it's very typical. And I think maybe it could be later, but in this case, we also can talk about some homosocial structures or something in monasteries. And in army. So this is the main fields where we can trace some tension.
Between teacher and the students.
I have, from my research, the problem that now as a Ukrainian researcher, I haven't access to Russian archives. So I think it could be kind of something, but from Ukrainian archives, I have another source. It's relatively late, it's 18th century already, but it's left bank hetman state, so it's Ukraine under Russian rule in that time. And yes, I have one example when the head of Pereyaslav Academy school was accused by his students of some attempts to rape them. So yeah, now currently I'm working on a text about this case and analyzing it. And remind me please about your... punishment in Muscovite Kingdom, usually it was made by a church law. So it's epitimia, it's some special number of praise or bows or some good things. For example, you can help as a punishment, you can help poor people or something. So it's but it wasn't regulated properly, so in some special cases they have special decisions. For example, some guys could be sent to monastery to think about their behavior to monasteries, you know. And of course there are some cases when they were punished by corporeal punishment, some beaten or something, but it was depending of their social position. For example, if they were like rich people or noblemen, they weren't punished, of course. So it's many cases, many decisions. And finally, these military articles of Peter I, they worked mainly for military men. So yeah, it's like total mess in the legislation for this period.
Molt bé, jo. Entens més o menys català? Sí. No, castellano, mejor. Castellano.
I will try to translate.
Vale.
But I don't know castellano.
Bueno, sí que he encontrado casos de mujeres solteras invirtiendo y en el diezmo. El inconveniente es que este trabajo va de manera conjunta junto al análisis de los diezmos procedentes de real patrimonio. Y hay, en determinados casos se solapan mujeres invirtiendo en procuración real y en mensa capitular. Lo que pasa que en mensa capitular normalmente siempre aparece el nombre de la mujer o simplemente se indica, per exemple, Antoni Coll i la seva esposa. Ja està. No hi ha més indicacions. Ara que he trobat, son casos muy extraños y muy novedosos porque en Europa o por ejemplo en Corona de Aragón, en otros sitios, en otros territorios peninsulares, no aparecen mujeres invirtiendo en los diezmos y por tanto de aquí que esta investigación, ¿no? De intentar mostrar cómo la mujer mallorquina, gracias a su patrimonio individual, no hay intervención masculina, independientemente de que esté casada o no, y por tanto ella invierte según los negocios que ella cree más beneficiosos para su patrimonio. No sé si me explico, pero sí que hay evidencias. Hay muy pocos, entre 1400 y 1420, bueno, mi trabajo es de 1380 hasta 1420, aparecen muy pocos casos, solo hay 4 casos de mujeres solas invirtiendo, pero ya da pie a que en investigaciones posteriores, ¿no?, pues estas ya aparezcan más número de mujeres invirtiendo solas y participando de este mercado de especulación, ¿no?, como era el diezmo.
At least the Italians understood much of because it was rather easy to follow. She says, in my research, I found only 4 cases of women who were not married, but she thinks that she could find more, and she thinks it was the legal situation of the Majorcan kingdom that allowed this, and it wasn't too important if the woman was married or not. So she expects she could find more.
Sí, y després que el Reino de Mallorca, independientemente de que fuera esto demuestra que independientemente que el Reino de Mallorca fuera un reino muy pequeño en cuanto a extensión, era muy importante a nivel social, económico, porque además tenía muchas relaciones, a lo largo del Mediterráneo era una potencia importante, y se demuestra a través de las leyes, a través de todos estos progresos.
The Kingdom of Mallorca was particular because it was very little from as far as geographical extension was concerned, but still was central for relation and trade, and so it had like special legislation, a different kind of legislation that enabled this situation.
Sí.
More or less.
Meno manco, sí.
Any other question? Olga, come here.
Thank you very much. So I have a question first to Hanna about this vision of homosexuality as an attribute to the stranger. You mentioned Muslim, you mentioned that Westerners saw Russians as more, with more of sexual behavior, but also we have this earlier and also common situation when the Westerners are seen as sexually, I don't know how to explain, so fornicators and so on. So was it visible already in your period, in your sources, for example, of how they see the travelers from Western Europe? And to the second speaker, I'll try, maybe you can translate. So the first question is about legal age. So you mentioned that widows of women of legal age could be involved in contracts. Is it the same age as in canon law, so 12, or some other? And the second question would be about widows. So there are different opinions on widows and their involvement. So some of scholars say that they were more oppressed by families and forced to remarry and so on, and others say that they were more free in what they were doing. What is about Majorcan widows? Thank you.
La prima, l'età legale, se era la stessa del diritto canonico, se l'età legale per fare le cose, la maggiore età. La seconda, la condizione delle vedove, delle donne a cui era morto il marito, vedovo, se erano costrette, come stavano, com'era la loro situazione.
Sì,
Okay, first of all, Anna.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. So I had written a lot about this, and my impression that at least in this period, and not only in this period, all cultures, countries, and particular some like environments had idea about sodomitical other. It depends of who is other. So, for example, in Italy in this time, the Spaniards were sodomitical others because of all these processes of being on Christian Muslim frontier. For Christians, Muslims were sodomitical others, and so on and so on. So this image of barbarian sodomitical Muscovite is like a part of common practice. And the main basic things about this, how it worked, usually, at least in Europe, it's about some distant lands, distant people, exoticism, you know, strange customs, and also about southern lands, southern warm climate, and so on. And another example, like in England of that time, Italians were sodomitical others, and they all even had this idea that it's contagious. It's like some kind of disease. This archaic idea about this like deviation as a disease, and if you traveled to Spain or Italy, you can be like yes. So in the case of Muscovites, it's the same. So it worked in a very similar way in all these cases, but it depends on current political situation, of course, current war. So yeah.
La primera es necesario, era necesario tener mayoría de edad para poder invertir en estos negocios.
¿Cuál era la edad?
18. De 8, majoria d'edat. És necessari, primen, és a dir, prioritzen les lleis civils a damunt la llei canònica. Perquè com que és un joc d'especulació, els canonges se veuen afavorits de per què la dona inverteix. Si vols contestar-li, puedes contestar, jo després te dic.
For what I understood, the age was 18, okay?
Sí.
Okay.
I la segona m'ha demanat les viudes. Entenc un cas, que és civil, que aquesta dona era dona d'un notari, i ella inverteix en determinats delmes, en diferents delmes, diferents anys, perquè tenia un patrimoni molt important i ella inverteix segons els seus interessos sempre.
¿Y su marido?
Sí, bueno, el suyo propio y el de su marido, que le deja en herencia como usufructuaria.
Quindi era più favorevole la posizione.
Era favorable. Sempre són dones amb una posició a un cert nivell. Vale? Sempre.
Saying that she met one case about the widow of a notary, and being a widow in her case was an advantage because she ended up managing a wide patrimony, both her own and her late husband's patrimony, and so it looks like for this evidence that it was a strong position because it allowed them to manage both patrimonies also of the late husband.
Clar, hi ha una cosa en relació que independientemente de que fueran mujeres casadas, en las leyes mallorquinas, por decir del reino, la mujer actúa como individual, sin intervención de su pareja. Por tanto, ellas pueden invertir invirtiendo su patrimonio en estos negocios.
Again, for Francesca, that in the law there was no difference. If you are married, if you are single, whatever, you were able to. And this, questa è una cosa molto particolare. They enjoyed a better condition than, like, for example, early 20th century Italians. So it's quite remarkable. Like, le italiane, ancora all'inizio della tradizione del diritto napoleonico, ancora all'inizio del Novecento avevano bisogno del permesso del marito per gestire il proprio patrimonio, non i patrimoni.
A
Mallorca poi lo hanno imposto, tipo...
El van imposar a la dictadura franquista, a la dictadura franquista, la dona estava subjecta a l'espòs, inclús per anar a votar el que fos, l'home li posava i ella posava El que passa que a nivell patrimonial jo sempre explico que, per exemple, aquesta xerrada la vaig fer a la Universitat de Lleida i sempre explico que la societat mallorquina és una societat bastant matriarcal.
Matriarcal.
Sí. Independentment de que se doni aquesta visió oscura, no? de la dona en època medieval, evidentment la dona està subjecta a l'home, a figura masculina, però veure com pot invertir ella sense intromissió de ningú. Ella se'n va a les subhastes, ella compra, ella ven, ella va a comprar esclaus, que això també ho tenen documentat. Compren esclaus, les venen sense figura masculina. I això és un aspecte molt novedós, no per dir-ho així, perquè tractant amb altres estudiosos d'Elmes i més, pues no l'han trobat rastre. I que un regne tan petit hi hagi això, pues...
She's saying that the Mallorcan society was matriarchal, so a central importance of the feminine figure, whatever were the representation, like obscure representation of patriarchy and centrality of the man, in the facts, the special character of the Mallorcan society was this central importance of women. Other questions? If there is no other question, we can start our lunch stop. So thank you to our speaker. We enjoyed very much your presentation. So let's go to our lunch break outside. Thank you.
Gràcies. Gràcies. No. Gràcies.